We're talking today with Bill Van Dopp of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Bill, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Muskegon Heights, July 20, 1926. My parents were immigrated from the Netherlands in 1919, I believe, and I'm one of 7 children, and I grew up there in the Muskegon Heights area until perhaps when I was finishing the 8th grade. I moved to Spring Lake to live with my older brother, who was a farmer and who needed some help.
Okay.
And so,
now, when you were young, what did your family do for a living?
Well, my father died about 3 years after I was born,
Okay.
and so my mom was alone there with her children, and she stayed in different places, and then she remarried a man in 1933 who owned a small truck farm on the south side of Muskegon Heights, and so we were raised on a little truck farm there, and we raised various vegetables and took them to the city market and so forth.
Okay. So you were one of the younger kids in the family, then?
I was one of the younger one. I was the third from the youngest of 7 children. Yeah.
Okay. And then you're in about the 8th grade, then you move, and now you live with the brother on his farm.
Yeah.
Now, in what ways did you think back on it, in what ways did the Depression affect you?
Well, I was pretty young coming through the Depression. When my mom remarried, I think I was probably in the 2nd grade, and I guess I kind of resented that for a while, because instead of going out and being able to play like most children do, I was put to work in the fields. And so it was cleaning up and planting, and it starts in February when you plant in the greenhouses, and then goes all the way through to the fall. But one of the things that I do remember was that we always had enough food to eat, and my mom would go to the city market with vegetables, and if there was anything left over at the end of the day, she would trade those for fruit from the fruit farmers up north. And so we had both vegetables and fruit, which was a good balanced food.
Okay. And then did you raise any livestock at all, or chickens or pigs?
We had chickens, so we had that, and we had one cow, which provided us with milk, but that was the extent of it.
Okay. Now, did you stay in school?
I stayed in school. I went through Spring Lake system, which was through the 10th grade, and then for my 11th and 12th years, I had to go to Grand Haven, from which I graduated in June of '44.
Okay. So how would you get to school in Grand Haven?
With my thumb. I hitchhiked. And, there was no bus transportation from the schools at that time there, and I had a couple friends who had cars, and when I got there on time, I could ride with them, but mostly it was hitchhiking, and if I didn't get a ride, I walked the distance, and it was probably considerably 5-6 miles, but that was common in those days.
All right. Now, in the period before Pearl Harbor, so 1939, 40 into 41, you got a war starting in Europe and stuff going on in China and things. Were you paying any attention to that?
Not really. I was living with my brother and sister-in-law, and I do remember her remarking one time. She says, "You're just at the right age, Bill. You will understand what the war is about, but you won't have to go in." That was a nice thing to say, but it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, it was almost true. All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Do I remember Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
I remember it. I do. I was in a car with some other of my friends, and we were riding through the streets of Grand Haven, and we had the radio on, and we heard about it, and it really didn't, I had no concept of where Pearl Harbor was at that time, but I just remember the day and the place where it was, but that's about it.
Okay. Now, after Pearl Harbor, what kinds of changes did you start to see, or what was happening now at home?
Well, of course, we were going into the rationing period, um, and I really didn't have much to do with that, except that I did work at a local gas station, and I remember the gas stamps that came in, and we were always trying to filch a little bit of the gas so that we could run around with the car, but I thought the system worked pretty good.
Okay. And then did you notice a lot of people going off and joining the military?
Oh yes, I had two older brothers. One was drafted and he was with the 32nd Infantry, and he went away. And then the next older brother enlisted in the Air Force, and so he left. And then I remember my oldest brother getting a medical discharge, and when I think I was about 15, he had his car down in Louisiana, and so my brother drove his car down, and I went down there with different members of the family and brought his car home. He was still in the hospital, and he was later medically discharged, but I remember that as a 15-year-old. I got to drive a car home from Louisiana, which was quite a trip.
Okay. Now that brother who was in the was he the one in the 32nd Division?
The oldest brother, the one that was discharged, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And did he go to New Guinea?
No, he did not. He was discharged, or he was hospitalized with a condition which prevented him from going.
Okay.
And that unit left, yeah.
All right. So that stuff is all going on. Now, as the war went on, did you still assume that it would end before you got in it?
Yeah, I did. When between my junior and my senior years, I tried to enlist in the Air Force. I wanted to become a pilot like every young kid. Unfortunately, my eyes wouldn't allow that, so that was a kind of a false start. And then during our last year in school, I noticed several of my classmates enlisted in the Navy, which allowed them to finish their schooling, but they would be picked up as soon as they graduated. I somehow, the Navy never really appealed to me, and so I just thought, well, okay, I'll just see what comes, and I waited around.
All right. So when did you get your draft notice?
I do not know when I got the draft notice.
Was it after you graduated from high school?
Yeah, I was 18 in July of that year,
Okay.
and I went down and registered, and when I was noticed, I was waiting. I expected as soon as I would signed up, or as soon as I was enlisted, as soon as I signed up through the draft, I felt that I was going to be called immediately. Well, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and it didn't happen until November. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but in November now you have to report.
I reported.
Okay, so where do you go first?
Well, we were in Grand Haven, and the train took us down to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and we spent probably 3 days or so there going through some various tests. And from there, I went to Little Rock, Arkansas, Camp Joseph Robinson. It was a camp there, and I was assigned to a unit, and we started our basic training there.
All right, describe a little bit what that basic training was like.
Well, the basic training was basically, first we got a lot of PT to get us in shape physically. Up early in the morning, breakfast, and fall in uniform and in formation, and then we would march off to the mess hall and go through that, and then right after we were allowed some time to go back to our barracks, we then would fall in for training. And the first 3 or 4 weeks was, as I say, mostly conditioning, and then eventually we got, well, of course, we learned a lot of different commands of marching and formation, and then they gave us rifles, and they took us to the rifle range, and there was first a week of what they call dry runs. You practice loading your gun, but not firing it, and then eventually we were out there shooting it at targets. We went with the M1 rifle, and then later we were shown the carbine rifle, and then we were also shown some of the other weapons that they had. Then as we gone through, they took us to the grenade range, and we were shown how to handle hand grenades, and then they also showed us all kinds of movies on how to protect ourselves out in the field. We learned how to dig foxholes and found out that a foxhole was one of your best friends because you could hide down there and the tanks would run right over you. And we went through that, and it's a scary thing. And then we went to the live ammunition where they were firing machine guns over our heads, and we had to crawl on our stomachs under barbed wire to learn how to approach various places. And then we finished our basic training with a 2-week bivouac in which we were out in the woods, and we marched from one place to another, set up camps, and sometimes we set them up in daylight, sometimes we set them up at midnight, and you never knew where you were. You just set your hope for a level place and that you wouldn't get rained on or wind up in the middle of a puddle in the morning, but you learn from experience, and that was one of the things we did.
Okay.
And then after basic training,
Well, let's back up a little bit for some pieces of this. How much emphasis did they place on discipline in basic training?
oh, very much, yeah, they were taught to obey the commands, and particularly when we were marching in formation, they would give us commands, and after a while you began to anticipate what it was, and then they would switch it on you, and then the platoon went in all directions. It was funny at first, but yeah, you learn discipline, and it's something that it's kind of stayed with me most of my life. I learned when you're supposed to do something, it's best to do it, and whether it's a self-imposed or whether it's from the outside, it works better if you follow it. And
Right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the Army?
Yeah, I don't remember it as a hardship. In fact, there are many things about it that I enjoyed because it put some structure into my life, which I didn't have an awful lot of before. And I've often said that the 2 years that I spent there were probably the 2 most productive years of my life. I went from being a boy to a manhood, I think, and so it was a good thing for me. And as to say, I experienced many of the benefits of being in the service without coming back with a lot of bad memories and injuries. And,
Right. Okay. Now, did it help you that you had come off of a farm rather than just being in the city?
It probably did, and because I was in fairly good shape at the time, but there was a lot of us people there that they could not march. I mean, they just were not up to it, and even in spite of doing the PT and so forth, so many of these, and I kind of like that. I could walk and walk, and the fact that I walked so much when I was in high school helped me a lot because I adapted to it quite easy, I thought, and so.
And then did you have any experience with guns when you were growing up, or?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I had never held a gun in my life. Well, I take that back. I think when I was in my later years in high school, when I lived with my brother, he lived had a farm there right on the Grand River, and it quite often would flood over in the spring and in the fall too. And there were a lot of ducks down there, and I did go out and shoot a shotgun. I never hit anything, but
Okay. So that part you had to learn pretty much.
that was learning, and
Okay.
it was a shotgun. I did learn the fact that when you pull the trigger and it goes off, it does give you a little bit of a jolt.
Right. Okay. Now, how long did the basic training last?
15 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. So you're finishing that now, kind of in the spring of '45.
Spring of '45.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do they do with you then?
I came home for about maybe 10 or 11 days. I'm not sure which, for what they call a delay en route. And then I took the train to California, went to Fort Ord, and I stayed there probably for a month and waiting for assignment. And they took us out each day and gave us more training in the sand dunes around Fort Ord. Then eventually, I think, I would say it was probably around maybe around Memorial Day, early part of June, we went up to Oakland and boarded a ship and sailed out early part of June. Arrived in Manila probably sometime early July. And,
Now, while you were still in California and you were training there, were you just getting basic infantry training still?
no, it was what they called advanced training. I don't know that it was essentially a lot of different. It was working with shooting again on the range. And,
But it's still combat training.
it was combat training,
Okay.
yeah.
Because you're going over essentially as a replacement,
As a replacement.
so you don't know what unit you will be with or anything else like that.
No, I do remember when we before we got on, they gave us all a bunch of Army woolens, and every one of us figured we were going to Alaska. Well, we wound up in the South or in Pacific, and then they took all the woolens away from us and gave them to those people who were coming out of the Japanese war camps, and gave them some warm clothing.
Right. Okay. What was the sea voyage like?
I was part of the what they call the advance guard. We got boarded the ship the day before it left, and we were given assignment to sweep down a certain deck. And by virtue of that, they allowed us to go down to the commissary on the ship and buy all the candy we wanted. And I bought a bunch of candy bars. And as we were leaving the next day, and I was having my fill of chocolate candy, and I don't think we were more than 5 miles out, and I lost all of it from the way. The ship was a large ship. I think they told us it had about 3,000 troops aboard. And each day I was assigned to sweep down a certain deck, and by virtue of that, they gave us a midday meal, which the people that did not have an assignment did not get. The midday meal consisted of a jelly and a peanut butter sandwich, but otherwise the other troops just had breakfast and evening meal. The trip was uneventful. I do remember as we got over toward our destination, there were some airplanes flying over. We're towing large sleeve targets, and the ship had 5-inch guns on them, and they were shooting at it. We joked about it because we said they never hit a sleeve all the way over. They said that we were worried that we were not in a convoy, and they said, well, this ship can outrun any Japanese submarine. I think they did that, told us that to calm our nerves. But anyway, when we got over there, we eventually did join up with a convoy before we moved north up into the Philippines. And I'm not sure how large that convoy was or how many ships were in it. But,
Okay. Did you make any stops between California and the Philippines?
no.
Okay.
Well, only to assemble with the convoy
Right.
someplace down in, we were told it was the Mariana Islands, which I'm not sure where they were. But
Okay, but you never get on shore or anything like
no,
that?
no,
Okay.
no.
All right.
We missed Hawaii going, and we missed it coming back, much to my
Oh, well. All right. And so then where did you land in the Philippines?
right in the Manila, and I'm not sure what part of it, but Manila is right on the bay, and we were then boarded on trucks, and we were trucked out to the replacement depot, and we were put in tents there, and we stayed there.
Okay. Now what did they do with you once you got to the replacement depot?
Not an awful lot. We would obviously we assembled. I do remember pulling some guard duty around a rice paddy at night, and it was darker than dark. I mean, it was, and you were walking around on a dike around the rice paddies, and we had flashlights, but you obviously didn't want to use a flashlight, and so you weren't sure where you were walking, and there was a green recruit just through basic, and every noise I heard, every noise within 500 yards of me, and I was pretty scared. I'll tell you, walking around a rice paddy at midnight, you just anticipate everything that's going to happen, but nothing ever did.
Well, why were you guarding a rice paddy? That seems like kind of an
Well,
odd thing.
that was part of their camp perimeter, and that was where I was assigned.
Okay, so it's really perimeter guard. It just happens to be a rice paddy.
Just a perimeter guard,
Okay.
and at that time, that area was secure from most of the Japanese.
Right.
But at that time there were some guerrillas that were still fighting in the area, and we didn't know whether they were friendly or the enemy. And I would say it was just more of a perimeter guard part of
Okay.
there.
Now, how long did you have to wait to get an assignment?
I would say probably 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, in that time, I mean, did you get to see anything of Manila itself or what it looked like?
No, we were pretty much confined to camp. And I do remember that I was one of the last ones that came over with, that was selected. And I was finally interviewed by a lieutenant and asked me how I'd like to be an MP. And I said, no, I don't want to be an MP. He says, well, you don't have any choice, which is the way the Army works. But I was kind of disappointed in the fact that I didn't go with too many of my friends that I came over with, and I'd been separated in basic training due to an illness, so I did not finish with my youth starting unit. And then I went to Fort Ord, and I waited there for a month, and then I got overseas, and I waited there for a month. Well, I finally got assigned to where I was.
Okay. Now, when you got your assignment, was the war officially over yet?
I would say no. I would think I got my assignment sometime around the 1st of August.
Okay.
And I think the war ended maybe 10 days later or something.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. Now, what is your assignment? You're an MP, and
I
then...
was an MP, and we were, as I said, this was a new camp that was set up, and we had a posted duty, various gates to the camp, and then we were right on the bay of Manila Bay, so we had a walking patrol along the beach, and the compound had a fence all around it, and the fence went right out to the shore, to the water line. But then of course the tide would go out and come in, and so we walk around the fence. But basically we stayed within the confines of the compound, so we were guarding those people that were within the compound for people, so that people couldn't go around the fence and come back in, but with ship and so forth.
All right. Now, what kinds of people were coming through the compound? I mean, would be
Well, those were, as I said, the early ones were the war internees, civilian internees going home, and then there were Army nurses coming in from the States, and they were being assigned to various units, and then we were also, those troops who had been over there and had gone through the war itself were going home, so we had troops moving in, or nurses moving in and out. Later, there was another compound for the enlisted WACs. They were in a separate compound, and then the command center was an old house that was owned by civilians, and that's where the camp commander and his staff were housed, and also where their offices were. And then there were other barracks that were set up to actually run the camp. We had a transportation department which organized all the transports moving in and out. The MPs had a separate area, and there were other units also. Obviously, the mess hall had theirs, and right now offhand I can't recall any other types of things, specialties that we had. We were primarily in the transportation business, I would say.
Okay. Now, how much did you see of the civilian internees?
Not a great deal. They were pretty much by themselves, and a good number of them did not have the health to move. We would see them going from the barracks to the mess hall and so forth. That phase of our work did not last a long time. I would estimate it maybe 2 to 3 weeks that they'd ship most of them out.
All right. Did you see more of the nurses coming in?
Well, yeah, they were with us for a long time, and they were kind of the main attraction. We had male officers driving down 70 miles from camp up north to meet an Army nurse. Yeah, there was, of course, being a civilian or being enlisted people, we were not supposed to fraternize with them, but we did get to chit talk with them and so forth. And other than that, that was pretty much our extent.
Yeah. Were the nurses just housed there and working somewhere else, or were there medical facilities there?
There were no medical, other than what the camp, we had a dental office there, and we had our own sick bay and so forth. But no, these were people primarily coming in to be assigned to places elsewhere.
Okay. All right. And then also now you start to see men coming in from the field or whatever, the ones who were done.
Yeah.
They've been in long enough, they have enough points, they get out.
Yeah.
What sort of impression did you have of them?
Well, we really didn't talk with them an awful lot. They were a much different group than the people coming in. They were older, and you could tell that they had been over there for a while, and they were pretty much of a mind, just get me out of here. I want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and the nurses coming in were more of a free spirit. This is a new area for a new excitement, a new part of my life, and so there was quite a difference there.
Yeah. Do you know if any of the nurses had already been serving over in Europe and then come over to the Philippines, or?
No, I think most of these were coming straight over from the States. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, how long did you stay on that base?
I was there the entire time, and so I would say from the time I started, probably the 1st of August of 1945 till I think I was there for 14 months, probably October I left.
Okay. Now, over the course of that time, you mentioned different people are coming in and out.
Mm-hmm.
How did life in the camp change, or did it change?
Well, the longer I was there, and I went from just being a guard on a post, I became a corporal of the guard, and then later on I was a sergeant of the guard. That changed my duties slightly. Instead of staying in one place, I was giving more freedom, or more assignment, so I'm in charge of a group. Also, sometime during that time frame, there was the CB camp about a quarter of a mile down the road, and which they had put up. And when that unit left, we took over their compound as well. And that compound was devoted to USO shows coming through the area. So we had an additional assignment to go down and guard that post of duty. And I remember one of the unique posts of duty was they had built a large water tower, and we had to climb up probably 30 or 40 feet on a ladder to get up there, and there was a little walkway around the tower, and that was one of our posts of duty, which is kind of an interesting one. So that was an additional assignment that we had. And then eventually I was pretty much put right in the command center for the MPs, and I manned the telephone system through the odd hours of the night. I would go on duty at 4 in the afternoon and stay till midnight, and then get the following day off, and then the next day I'd go in at midnight and go through to 8 in the morning, and we rotated like that. And that gave me quite a bit of free time, and at that time, being a sergeant, I was able to go down to the motor pool and check out vehicles for recreational purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So that rank, you had to have at least, I think, 2 stripes to get a vehicle. So that allowed us more freedom to move around, and we took trips into Manila, and we took trips up into the mountains of the Philippines. It just, we would get one vehicle, and maybe 3 or 4 of us would go up there and spend the day on a day off and so forth. Did get a chance to get around Manila? I don't remember an awful lot about it. I did get out to, took a tour of Corregidor and got down to walk in the tunnels and so forth. And again, my memory at this point is pretty vague of that, but I do remember going out there. Mm-hmm. And I think I took the trip more to say I was there.
Right. Now, when you went into Manila, could you see evidence of damage from the war?
Oh yeah. The roads, the system was pretty well broken down, and it was a worn-torn country, particularly during most of the time I was there. When you're on a military post, things are much better than when you get off the post. And when you think back the way these people survived and how they were living, even at that time, It was pretty primitive, and they did not have many of the facilities that we had. Well, we used them for, we hired, for instance, Filipino women to do our laundry, and they would sit there with rocks and pound it in water, and then they would, that was the cleaning. Our Army didn't have a great deal of thing. That was the way we did things over there. I don't know how the rest of the Army survived, but I would guess that, you know, where they had laundry facilities, but we did not have them over there.
All right. Now, were there problems with theft or begging or that kind of stuff? Did you have to keep an eye on things?
Oh yeah, that was one of the things we really had to watch. We had Filipino laborers in the mess hall and in the camp, and every time when they checked out in the afternoon to go home, we were required to search all their bags, and they were allowed to scavenging through our garbage to take that home, but quite often they would also manage to steal the stuff from the kitchen. And you know, if they did that too much, they were discharged. But yeah, that was a big part of our guard duty responsibility.
Now, did you ever get much of a chance to talk to any of the Filipinos? Or?
Oh yeah. Those that you could, you know, they would had a few words that we could understand, and yeah, they were a friendly bunch, and we did talk with them a lot. Yeah.
Okay. And did you get much of a sense of how the Japanese had behaved or done things while they were there?
Not an awful lot. I don't recall that I did. You know, it's probably a lot of things that they did not want to talk about because it was not an easy thing for them. It was quite a long war for them, and they do learn how to survive, and that was. I just remember most of them were ill-clothed, and they'd gone through a great deal.
Okay. Now, were there sometimes problems with some of the soldiers getting involved with prostitution or gambling or things like that? Did you have to keep an eye on people?
We didn't have a gambling problem as such. I'm sure there was prostitution going on all around us. That was one of the ways I'm sure the Filipino women were able to take care of themselves. And,
all right. You also mentioned that the Seabees had set up facilities for USO shows. Now, did you get to go to any USO shows?
Oh yeah, and the Seabees would set the camp up for themselves, but when they moved on to another camp, they just left the camp, or I don't know how it was transferred to our command, but obviously that was something in the planning. Yeah, the USO shows would come in there, and they would stay in the area probably for 2 weeks. Or they would stay on the compound for 2 weeks, and they would travel out daily or every other day to other Army camps around there and do their performance. And then when they had run their, gone through all the camps around there, they would move on, and another troop would move in. And so, yeah, there were various shows that came through there.
And did anybody come through who you ever heard of before? I mean, were anyone famous or just?
No, I can't say that I remember any. No, I remember, you know, I met several of them, but I don't remember any names going through there.
So you didn't get Bob Hope?
I did not get Bob Hope. No. I think when I was in basic training, though, I think Lena Horne was a singer at our camp for some time, and I seem to remember her quite well. Not quite well, but
yeah,
obviously.
But she was there. Okay. Now, see, over the course of the time that you're spending there, were a lot of the more senior enlisted men rotating out and leaving?
Yes, yeah, and obviously when the point system was put into effect, we were counting our points, and then as we got near, we could anticipate, you know, okay, we're within 4 points, maybe in a month or two it'll be our turn, and yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about that point system. Yeah, we learned how to count our points, and
But is that part of how you moved up the system? The guys who were your bosses go away, and now you're the senior guy?
Yes, that was partly true, but for the most part, I think the fellows that I served with were people that were coming over with me, and so that we were all in kind of in one group. And when we were finally assigned to come back, I'm not even sure how much more of a task our unit had, because that was a full year after this the war ended, and I think things had settled down, and the Army was pretty much organized as to where they were going and how many troops they needed over there, and obviously all the war veterans had gone home, except then they came along with what they called I think the Red Apple, and they were enticing some fellas to re-enlist, and they would send us home for, I think, 30 days, and then bring us back to our unit. And that sounded kind of inviting to just be able to, that would get you home faster than waiting for your point system. But then, of course, you were over there and you didn't know how long you were going to be over there. So.
Right. Now, was your original enlistment just for the duration, or
for the duration?
So you really didn't know when they would send you home, otherwise, except for the whole point.
That was an open-ended thing, yeah.
Okay. How close before you actually were sent home? I mean, how much advance notice did you have that you were going to get to go home?
I really can't recall that I had any advance notice. Maybe 2 weeks at the most.
All right. Now, are there other things that happened, or other memories you got from being in the Philippines that kind of stand out for you?
On July 4th of 1946, I was in a crowd in which the Philippines were declared independent. They had several speakers there. I don't recall who they were, but I was in the crowd. I thought that was quite an event.
Okay. And how did the Filipinos themselves behave at that point?
They were quite excited about that, yeah, and they were a free country, and there was a large crowd there. I don't recall how many, but it was at some big place right along the bay there, where the highway is.
All right. Now, it gets to be late in the year in 46. Now you have orders to go home. How do they get you back?
We came back on a ship, and it was a rather small one. As we were leaving the Philippines, we ran into the tail end of a hurricane, and the ship went up and down with every wave. It was a pretty rough voyage for a while. But I think it took us 21 days to come back across the Pacific. We landed in Oakland, and they brought us into a large enclosed area. It had beds, it had a mess hall, it had a bowling alley, and it had fresh milk and ice cream, which we enjoyed much to our taste. That was a great thing, and we stayed there for I'm guessing maybe a week, and then we were shipped up to Camp Beale, up further north in California. That was a camp that was already partially being shut down, and we were in an area and waiting for our names to be called and board a train going home. And so that was the end of my experience in the Army.
Now, where did they actually discharge you?
From Camp Beale.
Okay, so you went there. So you just go straight home from there, not Fort Sheridan or something like that?
No,
okay.
Went right from there right home.
All right. Then once you got back home, you're out of the Army. Now what do you do?
Well, my folks were about ready to go to Florida, and so I had no place to stay. I had an older brother, the one that was in the Air Force. He was up at Ferris, finishing his high school, because I was going back. I was the only one of my siblings that went through high school. All the rest of them had to quit and work and go on the farm. But I was in Grand Haven, and I was kind of different that way. Anyway, he was finishing his college prep, so I hadn't seen him in all the entire time that he was in there. So I went up to Big Rapids and I talked to him. And when I was there, I found several of my high school buddies were there as well. And at that time, I had no idea of going to college. It just never entered my mind. But they were there, and they said, "Well, come on, Bill, come on up here and go to college." And my brother encouraged me to do so. That was his goal. And so I said, "Well, okay." And so I went up there, and I didn't even have my. Well, in fact, I was still on the Army payroll because this was early November, and I wasn't discharged until later. But they were very gracious. They said, "Well, we'll just hold your VA stuff until you are." And so I think probably within a week of my Army discharge, I was enrolled as a student up there going to college. And they at that time, I kind of joke about it. Ferris offered pharmacy, business administration, and a thing called the trades and industry, which was clock repair, and it was the becoming of television, and that was a big thing. And so I'm not having a science background. I guess accounting was or business administration was the only thing that was open to me. So that's what I went in for, and turned out I was suited for it. So that was it. And so I went to college and graduated in February or March of 1950.
All right, and then what kind of job did you get?
I went to work for the Internal Revenue Service as a revenue agent, and being from Muskegon, I was given an assignment in Muskegon. I had to go to Detroit and be interviewed, and during the interview, he asked me if I would like to work in Muskegon. She had just finished nurses training, and so we had just been married between graduation and my entrance into workforce. We were very happy to get an assignment in Muskegon, and so I stayed there for until 1973, in which then I was later transferred to Grand Rapids.
All right. Now, did you meet your wife in college or earlier?
No, I met her on a blind date. Yeah, well, I didn't. She was a nurse's trainee, and my brother was dating another nurse trainee, and they put us together. And so at that time, student nurses were not allowed to marry, and I didn't make enough money to marry anyway. So we both had to go through single, but as soon as we were through, we were married.
Very good. All right. To go back a little bit, while you were overseas, how much communication did you have with people back home?
I would write to my mother. Occasionally I'd write to one of my other brothers. I had two stepbrothers who were also in the service, but not an awful lot of writing. My mom had so many letters to write, with having about 4 of us in the service, and she was not a great writer in the sense that being an immigrant, she didn't have, it was very difficult to read her writing in English. Her English was somewhat limited. No, I can't say I would have a great deal of correspondence coming in.
All right. I'm going to go back to the other end of the story. Part of why I'm here talking to you today is because in May of 2015, you went on an honor flight organized by the Spirit of Grand Rapids group. Can you talk a little bit about the honor flight? What was that like?
That was something that, I don't know if you've interviewed Ira Speaker, who was also a resident here, and he had gone on an earlier trip, and he had shown us some of the things that they had. And he, when the second trip came up, he encouraged me to do it. And I was still reluctant, but then my son said, "I think you ought to do this." And I was a little bit concerned because the sponsor goes with you had to lay out $500 to do that. And I didn't really want to ask him to do that. And so I was rather hesitant about going, but I was finally convinced. The experience itself was outstanding. I was impressed with how organized that whole trip was. It was none of this hurry up and wait stuff. When you got there at 5:30 in the morning, you registered, you went from there to the photo op, from the photo op to breakfast, from breakfast to the airplane. Everything went on schedule. Very, very professionally done. We were on the plane on time. We got there on time. And the next thing that impressed me was the number of people that greeted us at Reagan Airport.
Mm-hmm.
We just went through a whole line of people, and I could not understand why all these people came to meet us. You know, we're just one airplane. There were 102 veterans, I think, on that flight. We went down they had a tape, and people stayed behind the tape, but they were high-fiving us and welcoming us, and it was quite an experience. Then we boarded buses, and the night before we were invited out to the Thousand Oaks Golf Course for a dinner, and we met a woman out there who also happened to be our bus tour guide.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was a retired brigadier general in the Air Force, a very, very personal person, and so we got to know her quite well. And we boarded the buses and started our tour around Washington, and saw many of the memorials there. Mm-hmm. And then and each of us had a wheelchair. I did not require one until we finally got to the World War II memorial, and then they told us that they were going to let us out and we were going to be on our own. And so my son said, maybe it's time we take a wheelchair, and so we did. And he wheeled me around the memorial, and we had probably half an hour to 45 minutes to explore as we wanted to. And then at 2 o'clock they put us together and took some photographs, and then they turned us loose again, and we were entitled to go all the way up and down the mall. Mm-hmm. And they told us they would pick us up at the far end of the mall. So we made our way down, saw several of the memorials along the mall, and wound up at, we went through the Korean Memorial and also the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial. Mm-hmm. And then, but I was, even so, we were always on time. We were always right on schedule, and that kind of impressed me. I didn't realize how much work had gone into that, but and then they took us to a field mess on the mall, and it was a mess hall, they were army tents, mm-hmm. and they had us go through a chow line, and they fed us a meal. We ate under an army tent, and there I met several other people that were there, different people, then we were put back on the bus, and just as we were put back on the bus, we saw a few drops of rain hit the windshield, and that was the beginning of a very rainy evening. Mm-hmm. And as we got back to the airport, it was raining very hard. That was the only delay in the trip that we had, and I think that was due to the weather. Mm-hmm. And then we came back to Grand Rapids. During the flight back, they handed us each a mail call thing, which I was not expecting, and I didn't even open it until I got home. And I opened it, and I saw there were lots of stuff in there, and I put it back in, and I didn't want to lose any of it. But then we got off the plane and or off the bus at the
like East Kentwood High School, I think.
Yeah, the high school. Well, yeah, we got off the airplane and then came out on the bus over. Oh, that was another thing at the airplane. They had these fire trucks out there, and we came through a water shower, and then we got to on the buses, and they took us through to the East Kentwood, and then we went through another crowd of people, and we walked and we walked and we walked, and finally got to the end of the high school. And what impressed me was we had children 5 and 6 years old there, and adults 70 and 80 years old there, and my grandkids were there and greeted us, and then we were given a picture of our group pictures that they had taken earlier in the day, and we then waited for our to get our family together to pick us up and take us home.
All right. So
Very full day. Started off, I think, at 4 in the morning, and we didn't get back to bed till 1 o'clock the following morning.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd just like to close this by thanking you that going to take the time to talk to me today.
Well, it was a great day, and as I said, while I didn't enjoy a lot of the Army experiences, I look back on it as one of those things that I'm glad I served, and I'm impressed by the way people are remembering us nowadays. If you go into anywhere and they know you're a veteran, I mean, my goodness, people pick up your dinner check. It's good to see the people giving some honor due to the veterans, and that's great.
All right.